The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I'm so excited to be bringing you Dr. Lynn Marie Morski. Hi, Dr. Lynn Marie. How are you?
Hi, Beth. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
So good to have you. So really quickly, if you haven't heard about Dr. Lynn Marie Morski by now, she is the president of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, host of Plant Medicine Podcast, the founder of plantmedicine.org, and the medical director for wayofleaf.com. She is a Mayo Clinic trained physician in family medicine and sports medicine, as well as an attorney and former adjunct law professor. And Lynn Marie, you are up to so much out there in the plant medicine world and psychedelics world. Give people a little bit of an overview about what you're up to now, and then I'm going to ask some questions about where you came from, because I love that part of the journey. But what is it that you're up to with all these, organizations and podcasts and all the resources you're putting out there? It's just so amazing.
You covered a lot in the bio, but I guess my main two things that I have going on right now in the psychedelics world are that I'm president of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, and our mission is to educate primary care doctors and other clinicians on what's currently available and what's coming to be available in the psychedelic medicine and therapeutics world. And then also, like you said, I host the Plant Medicine Podcast, which is where I bring, I think that the association is more focused on clinicians, and the podcast is more helpful to maybe potential patients and users of these medicines. And it's a little bit of Psychedelics 101. We bring the science to listeners, and I have all kinds of experts on, from James Fadiman to Dr. Julie Holland and everybody in between. And so that's been a really exciting project.
Nice. I love it. And actually, so this is where I want to know what inspired you to start this. When I first started hearing about you a few years ago, I was like, wow, this is awesome. She's just getting right to it and getting really deep into the science, which I love. I'm a total science nerd. I have an atom tattoo on my back. But yeah, what inspired you to go from doctor to attorney to something you don't talk about much? You had I think a career in between these where you were like a quitting coach, which I do want to ask about too, because there's a lot of people watching and listening to this that totally want to quit their jobs and go into the psychedelic field. But what inspired you to create this association and the podcast?
So I had been working at the VA for 9 years. And as you're well aware, the VA's population is a fantastic target audience for those who could be using psychedelic therapies. I mean, we know we've got Heroic Hearts and Veterans of War and Vets and all these organizations that are trying to get veterans psychedelic therapies. But at the time, I'm learning over my 9 years at different points. I'm learning about these psychedelic therapies. I'm experiencing them for myself. But as a Department of Defense employee, I couldn't talk about them. So I first off couldn't share that I even had my own experiences. So like you said, I wrote a book on quitting, and people would interview me and they'd say, what can we not ask you about? I'm like, just the most transformative things I do. No big deal. So it felt very inauthentic to have to hide, for example, ayahuasca journey revelations or whatever that had helped me so much in my own journey. So after 9 years, speaking of quitting, I quit with no backup at all. I had no other job lined up, and I was paying like Southern California rent by myself. So I was like, oh my God, this is like the craziest decision. I have no savings, but I'm so out of alignment and I cannot take it anymore. So I took my own advice and left. And I didn't really know what the future after that would look like, but I had a mission, and my mission was to educate clinicians and physicians, et cetera, on these medicines, on psychedelics. And I started by making the plant medicine podcast because I already had another podcast about the quitting topic. And I thought, well, I know how to do a podcast. And I also thought, which is very accurate, I'm not an expert in any of these medicines. I'm a total newbie, but I want to educate people. How am I going to learn while educating? Okay, I will interview people on a podcast. That would seem to be like the best way because I'm learning from these people at the same time that I'm putting it out to the world and they can be learning, right? Everybody wins. So that's how I started the podcast. And about 6 months in, the podcast was aimed at medical professionals, but it occurred to me that that's not how medical professionals necessarily get medical information. If I want to know, like, what's the latest in how to treat high blood pressure, I'm not like, let me find a podcast that talks about high blood pressure. You get things sent to your inbox. It's like, here's the latest update on high blood pressure treatments. And I was like, okay, that's how we have to get to clinicians. We have to get in their inbox in a way that they're going to be able to check an email between patients and get the latest without having to listen to a 45-minute podcast. And so that's when the idea for the Psychedelic Medicine Association was founded. And that's exactly what it does. So when people sign up to be members of the association, every month we send them a newsletter. It has 5 or 6 of the latest studies that have come out. And then once a month, we've started doing panels on topics that are like immediately applicable to their practices. We have a lot of ketamine therapists, for example. And so this month we did increasing access to ketamine therapy because we know it can be very expensive and there are a lot of creative ways to make it much more affordable for people. And we're trying to put a little positive peer pressure on those who are maybe charging a whole lot for something that is generic. So, we're trying to do things like that. So we've got this big community now. We've got a number of clinicians and we've got over 50 organizations that have joined. And there's a forum there that they can all talk to each other. And so that's how the 2 separate projects came. And so I want to keep doing the plant medicine podcast. I now do it twice a month instead of every week because it's a great, ancillary. Like I said, patients seem to tune into that. So if patients are like, what is a psilocybin journey like? Well, there's the episode on patient psilocybin experience. It's very... As opposed to some other podcasts that are, and no shade to those podcasts, but that are like, here is a person, mine is here is a subject. And it may have a very famous person talking about it, but you can easily go through. If you're like, I have depression and I'm considering ketamine, there is a ketamine for depression episode. Like it's very specific to medicines. And if you want psilocybin, okay, I'm really interested in psychedelic or in psilocybin, but I want to know what the science is. There's a scientific research episode on psilocybin. Wow. So it's like, I wanted it to be like an encyclopedia of psychedelic medicines and their therapeutic effects. And so that's what the podcast is. So it's still a great tool. In fact, even to, if practitioners do want to get more information than we're sending them, we send them some podcast links, but that's how the 2 separate things got formed.
This is incredible because I know, so I've been on a psychedelic path for a very long time, but I got really deep into it about like 9-10 years ago. And I remember I was living in New York City. I go to, pretty good doctors and therapists. And it was amazing how many people hadn't even heard. I mean, not even just 10 years ago. I'm talking like 6 years ago or 5. Hadn't even heard about some of the medicines I was working with. And then, their only advice, of course, was don't do it because it's dangerous. And, we don't know enough about it. And it's just so interesting how fast everything's been moving and how now, of course, I mean, if there's a doctor out there who hasn't even at least opened their eyes up to what's going on in the mainstream media, I think that's a problem. But this niche that you're serving is so important, even just to educate. I mean, I'm curious, are you getting a lot of these doctors that maybe aren't even working with psychedelics, but then, I don't know, they're starting to notice this uptick and people want to talk to them, or maybe they're suffering from, their patients, obviously people go to them for anxiety, depression, everything else, day-to-day life in 2021. Are people getting interested in this that maybe aren't even serving it or in the actual field?
Well, that's who our target audience is. We don't want to preach to the choir. Our message is to educate the average doctor. And, I'm from O'Fallon, Illinois. That is a small town in Southern Illinois. Like, would your average doctor there have much exposure to this in their circle of friends? Probably not. So here's the thing. I want to take a step back because I do not want to, there's no shame to the doctors who do not know about this, right? Like, does your average doctor have time to go home and read a bunch of articles on Forbes? No, they don't. So I'm not holding it against any doctor who does not currently know about psychedelics, because if you don't know a thing exists, how are you expected to go up and look for information on the thing? that's like a weird existential impossibility of some sort, right? Like you can't be searching a thing you don't know exists, right? No doctor in, even in psychiatry is probably going home like, depression, putting into Google, like how many pages are going to come up before ketamine comes up, right? Like this is the thing. We're not educated about it in medical school because it wasn't legal, right? So don't hold the doctors against that.
Yeah.
And then where else do we get education? Well, we get it from our continuing medical education courses. And until like 2020, there weren't any on psychedelics. And again, if you don't know psychedelic medicine is a thing, it's really hard to go like, where can I find psychedelic medicine CME, right? This is why it's like what I think we're doing, not to toot our own horn, but what we're trying to do in the Psychedelic Medicine Association is important is we're trying to reach out to the people who do not know it's a thing and let them know it's a thing. For example, I had a conversation with a med school classmate of mine just yesterday, lives in Nebraska. And she was calling, asking, because somebody had come to her with kratom questions. And I said, boy, I wish it was like anything else, because kratom is definitely the thing I know the least about. But then we started talking about CBD, which I do know a lot about. And she was like, well, because of, and here's the thing, it's not the doctor's fault. It's the way that our litigation system is set up. That if we do not, we have to be conservative, right? Your doctor has to say don't do it, because if they say anything else, they put themselves in a world of liability. For example, like she was afraid to say, use CBD, because what if then they go and they get gas station CBD and there's like some weird solvent in it and then they get sicker, right? Like these are real concerns. And, so doctors, of course, are going to say, don't do it, even if they've heard of it, but they're going to have to feel really comfortable with it before they can say, first off, and still, aside from ketamine, they cannot legally say, do this. Right? We can have conversations about what they can and can't say. They can say, I have seen that there has been research showing this, but they cannot recommend things that are currently illegal. They might say things like, hey, you might want to look at some clinical trials, but what doctors can say is really limited, which is not the doctor's fault. So like in this world of psychedelics where we're trying to like decrease the polarity and decrease the us versus them, or in theory, we should be trying to do that. Let's decrease the doctor versus other, because we're all part of the same team. If you break your arm, fine, go to a shaman. That'll be great. Like, I think you'd be more effective if you might go to your orthopedic surgeon and they said it, right? So like there's room for everybody in a healing treatment. It's not one's better than the other, pick one or the other. Like there's room for everybody, and we need to foster some bridges to work together. And so I think, once, for example, so I'm having this conversation with my friend, we start off with, she's like, I would never tell anybody to take CBD. And then I start telling her, well, here's the thing. As long as the CBD has no solvents and it says on the label what's in it, and this, here's the studies for PTSD, here's the studies for arthritis. She's like, wow, maybe I've been wrong this whole time. All it takes, your average doctor wants to do best by their patients. They just don't, they're working 60 hours a week and nothing's coming to their inbox telling them, hey, CBD is okay. And here's, especially because like there's no regulation on it. So it's really hard for them to say, go do it. Same thing with lots of psychedelics. Oh, go to an ayahuasca retreat center. They end up with one that's like shady, so exactly. And so like, there's a lot of, real reasons that your doctors may not feel comfortable having that discussion, but that's why it's imperative on all of us in this movement to work together, help educate your primary care doctor if they don't know, don't hold it against them and then just go leave and see another doctor. I mean, if they never open their minds and won't even discuss it with you, sure, maybe find somebody else, but this is your opportunity to educate and have that dialogue.
Yeah, no, I love this so much, because I've actually had some really negative experiences with CBD out of all the things there are. I'm like, it's legal. It's sold at like you said, at the gas stations, but I've only found one that works for me after spending probably $600-700 on, 5-6 brands. So this is important to get these messages out there. And there are people, the everyday average person like me telling my own mother, like, why don't you try something like CBD for your arthritis? But instead, she just goes the one route and doesn't consider anything else, because, I know the doctors she's going to they're not in that, they're not talking to you yet. But more and more people are becoming open, which I'm sure is why this is taking off. And I think this is why it's so necessary. So I'm going to come back and ask you a lot more questions about what you're up to with this. But I want to know, because I know there's a lot of listeners who are in a very similar space as you probably were working at the VA. For example, I actually have a whole bunch of clients that are in traditional healthcare, nurses, nurse practitioners, occupational therapists. I've had doctors who also fell onto the psychedelic medicine path, something got woken up inside of them and they started having, these epiphanies that they were misaligned with the work they were doing. Mostly exactly what you just said, because of the actual, the structures and all the red tape. And I cannot even imagine how much worse it is in the VA than just working at a, regular hospital or, a nurse at an office. But I have sensed so much frustration coming from the traditional healthcare field, and a lot of, this awakeness, which is a huge part of what I'm doing with this podcast and with what I've done with my past summits, comes out of the psychedelic experience. I'm curious, was there a connection between, you started working with psychedelics and then you would see people coming into the VA and you knew that they weren't really getting the right information? Like where did your own personal journey with psychedelics play into your path to completely quit and start something different? Like where's that connection?
Not at all in the way that you would think, because I've always known I should not be a doctor. Once, and not by always, I mean like after 10 years. So it took 10 years to do pre-med meds, because I started off as a multimedia designer and I got into medicine for lots of reasons. Like, we didn't have a lot of money. We had to figure out a way that was going to be like stable for our, in case our parents needed some money. So my brother went to law school and I went to med school. And, there were lots of reasons that people go into medicine, and you think you're going to want to like work with patients. I thought I would, because I was a multimedia designer, was staring at a computer screen all day. I was like, oh, I'd much rather be talking to patients. Not like like you don't really know what it's going to be like to be giving your energy in a certain way 8+ hours a day, especially like at the VA. I'm hearing really heavy stories hour after hour after hour. And like that takes a lot of focused attention. And it really, like there's an energetic exchange that I am not cut out for. Like when I look at a psychedelic therapist who can sit there for 8 hours, I'm just like, God bless that you exist. I could not do that. So like my job at the VA was, it was actually just like kind of one of the things that I could do, because regular medicine had call and all these other things. And so I was like, okay, I found that at least the VA was giving me an hour with patients. Like that was the difference. So I was doing compensation and pension. I wasn't treating anybody. I was just doing an exam that got them benefits, right? So I'm not prescribing medicines, nothing like that. But I'm having to hear everything that happened to them in the service. But at least it didn't have a whole lot of the things, like you said, with traditional medicine, where you have 15 minutes to see a patient. They can call you at all hours of the night and ask for opioids and all those things, right? This wasn't like that. But on the flip side, it was a lot of really intense stories in that hour. And here's the thing. We'll go to the entrepreneur side of things, right? I was working 10 hours a week. My entire job was 10 hours a week, and I was making 6 figures. It was very hard to like leave that kind of job. Everybody's like, are you insane? You're a doctor. You work 10 hours a week. And like, we're not talking high 6 figures, kids, but like enough. And I was so miserable. I would spend every hour that I wasn't there dreading the next time I had to be back there, because it's so out of alignment for me. Like, it's just, I was not cut out to be working with patients in that capacity. And like, once you get $250,000 into medical school debt, as I was, and 10 years in, it's, like, what are your options at that point that are going to make you enough money to like to pay off your loans, et cetera, et cetera. So I was doing the thing I thought I could like get by doing, golden handcuff situation, because decent amount of money for very little work. But so here's where the psychedelics come in. So I start doing psychedelics on my own in 2013, and first ayahuasca journey was 2018. And it's April 2019. And I do my first ever microdose of psilocybin. And somebody had given it to me. We didn't measure anything out. I knew nothing about microdosing at this point. Nothing. But he's like, here's some powder. And so I take it and we go snowshoeing, and we come back and I said, I don't feel anything. Again, I did not know it was supposed to be subperceptual. I knew next to nothing. So he says, here's some more. So we take some more, and then we go like rock climbing. And on the way home from rock climbing, I was like, yeah, I still didn't feel anything. And he says to me, he said, sometimes, he goes, it sounds weird, but sometimes I feel the effects 48 hours later. And I'm like thinking, my doctor brain's like, that metabolism sounds weird, but okay, and I forget about it. And then like, that was a Sunday, and I go back to my job at the VA on Monday, and everything's fine. Tuesday, I get an email, and the email was like, we didn't like how you did this one patient appointment. You have to redo it or whatever. And I was like, oh no. Like, because once they start harping at you for a thing in the government, right, they're just going to keep harping at you for a thing. And this was just a minor email, right? I cried for 12 straight hours. And by 2 a.m, I'm talking to a friend in Sweden because nobody else is awake. And I was like, why am I still crying? It was one email. And then all of a sudden it like flashed back to me that like 48 hours, right? The mushrooms will kick in 48 hours later. And it was like, oh my God, I think the mushrooms are showing me the sadness in my soul that is there all the time from this job. And it was at that point when I was like, I have to leave. I absolutely have to leave. And so the next month when it came up that like my security clearance was about to expire, I was like, oh, this is a sign from the universe. I'm not renewing the security clearance. I'm out. And that's why I left. I mean, I left with no backup because I couldn't. I was not going to renew it. There was a deadline. There was, you're gone. And so that's how psychedelics like played directly into my leaving in kind of a little more unusual way, because obviously I'm like realizing that they could help all these people and stuff, and wish that I could do something about it. But again, there I was with golden handcuffs thinking like, well, I can't be, I'm not going to do any more good on the street yelling with my sign about psychedelics if I'm homeless. Like I still need to have a job. And so it was really like, it took that microdose to show me like, no, your health is suffering. You need to get out.
Yes. Thanks so much for sharing that story. Because there's so many people who go through this and feel that call to do something else that as I always say, it's your soul that's calling you into that alignment. But the golden handcuffs are very powerful. I know I was in corporate America for almost 15 years and it took forever to leave, and it took, the universe doing it for me. So this is, a lot of people listening feel this exact same way you do. And then maybe it's just this one moment that gets triggered and something wakes up inside of you. Now, I'm curious, when you quit and you went and started, I think you maybe started the quitting business, can I ask, was it like hard? Were there moments where you were like, what the fuck did I just do? I want my job back. Has it been the up and down journey like 99.9% of the entrepreneurs I know?
So that wasn't what happened. So I started the quitting thing in 2016 because I was trying to like, okay, if I write this book and I become like I was completely delusional. I seemed to think that like I could make a full-time living as a speaker. Word to the wise, guys, that is a very rare thing that happens. Like I really don't know that I know anybody who is doing their full-time thing. Like they're probably at least coaching or doing something else right on the side. But I didn't know any of that. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so I was like, I'm going to write this book and then I'm going to become a speaker. And then that's how I'm going to get out of the VA. So like I write the book in 2016 and it gets picked up by a publisher and they said, okay, they're going to publish at the end of 2018. So that's when I started the podcast to start like promoting the book, blah, blah, blah. And then I was actually like, I got to speak in Canada and I got to speak in like the Cayman Islands and all these places and that's when I was going to all these physician conferences because physicians were the biggest one picking up on my message. It wasn't specifically about doctors quitting, but they really like honed in on it. And I was going to these conferences and I was like, hey, do you guys know anything about ketamine? And they're like, no. Like, that's the thing. I was just doing some like informal research, like because I'm not in practice now. I was at the VA doing something so different that I was like, what does your average primary care doctor know? So essentially the quitting thing was getting me nowhere financially close to where I could leave. Not at all. I tried to be a quitting coach. And here's the thing. If you're not cut out for medicine, you're not cut out for coaching. I'm just going to say that because it's the same energy exchange. Like I think, I'm just giving maybe that's a very blanket statement, but it was a very, it's in medicine. If I was done in 30 minutes, then I was done. But in a coaching call, if you're there for an hour, you got to find something to fill that hour with. And like, that's a sustained amount of attention, and your clients may be as, high maintenance or low maintenance or whatever as regular patients, right? Like it's the same gamut of people. So if you feel like you're not cut out for medicine, depending on what you're not cut out for, if you're not cut out for medicine because the appointments are too short, great, go into coaching. You can make your appointments as long as you want. But if it's that energetic exchange, I mean, I think this may be the most I've ever talked about it, but like really be honest with yourself about here's the thing. Like I always say this, when you're leaving a position, be honest with yourself about the parts of it that brought you energy and the parts that drained your energy. Like I could tell you the parts I loved about doing the quitting podcast and then the parts that I didn't love. And I loved doing the podcast, but I didn't love the actual coaching, right? I love speaking on stages, but I didn't love running my own social media, for example. And so know those things and have a list of like, I'd say if you're trying to change careers, have a mission statement. And then, and I'll tell you why the mission statement is important. And then have like this list of things that you enjoyed and didn't enjoy about it. Because yeah, I was trying very hard to use that quitting thing to get out. So when I actually got out of it, I was just taking my own advice that I had been telling other doctors forever. Because I had been saying, because there's a physician suicide epidemic. And I kept saying, like, if you're about to commit suicide, don't wait until you've got a backup job. Don't wait until you've got savings. Because otherwise, I was suggesting wait until you've got savings. You know, I don't want anybody to like fall down Maslow's hierarchy of needs and be like, now I need food, you know? But if you're struggling, and I had a physician come up to me after I said that at a conference, she's like, I was near suicidal and I had to quit. And, you know, I had to go move back home. I said, good for you. Like, absolutely. But I hadn't realized that, like, you know, there are some steps before you're suicidal at which you should probably still be quitting your job. And that's what the, you know, the microdose showed me. Like, I think this is like a low level 9-year depression I've been in. Exactly. And I still need to get out of the other side of it. So yeah, like the quitting thing, essentially when I quit my job at the VA, I kind of basically quit most of the quitting things at that time as well. I still spoke at some conferences and stuff, but I started the plant medicine podcast the week after I quit the VA. Like that's when that's when I made my mission statement, because I was looking like, how do I get out of the VA? Oh, maybe I can work in pharma, or I can do this thing or whatever this thing. And I'm like, if your mission is to spread the word about plant medicines, then the only pharma you should be working with is like Epidiolex, like a CBD based product, right? Like that, you know, you should. And so I did. Like the jobs I was applying for were like GW Pharmaceuticals. Like this, I want to keep my eyes on the prize here. I don't want to just go hawk some random diabetes medicine. Like that's not going to fulfill me any more than the VA did. So keep that in mind. Keep your mission statement, and then keep what you do and do not like about a job, so that you make a more educated decision moving into your next position.
That's totally it. You mentioned fulfillment, mission. This is actually one of the first things I teach to my clients, but usually my clients, especially a lot of these people that are in, you know, traditional systems, you know, it's not, and it was the same thing as my journey. I didn't actually hate what I did. I was just so misaligned with everything that it stood for. You know, and that's, you know, like a lot of my clients want to help heal. You know, it's like they became nurses or doctors or, you know, whatever it is that, you know, in the traditional field to help heal people. But then they saw the reality of the system, which we all know is so broken. I can't even begin. That's a whole podcast on its own. I'm sure there are many about it. But the whole medical system is really broken and backwards, and it doesn't quite really, not always has the best interest of healing in mind. So a lot of my clients are like, well, you know what? I was a physician, but I studied functional medicine, and this aligns with who I am. It aligns with, you know, my values and what I believe to be the truth of healing. Let me make this shift. And actually, a lot of my clients, they don't end up quitting their job, but what they do is they end up starting a business and then transforming within their job. I've seen this happen so many times, where their traditional, you know, their hospital is curious, like, oh, what is this that you're teaching? This kind of new, you know, new yet ancient, you know, healing modality. And then they start getting curious. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing the shift with the kind of work that you're doing. And I want to go back to this and hear more, because you know, it's moving so fast. You know, everything's very exponential. You know, I exactly like you said, maybe there's a doctor in small town in Illinois that hasn't heard of this, but you know, like now I live in kind of this community, which is very mixed with like the people who are established here, like country in the middle of nowhere, and then people like me who moved up from New York City. And it's just so interesting. No matter who I meet, the second I mention psychedelics, someone has a story to tell or some curiosity or, oh, I've been hearing about that, or yeah, you know, give me some, I need to, you know, help my depression, because everybody and their mother has anxiety right now, anxiety and depression. So I'm curious, do you have any people who are, let's say, aspiring facilitators? Because that's another thing that's going on right now, right? There's this uptick of people who believe that we should just be giving psychedelics out to everybody, which, by the way, I don't particularly think that's true, not in my personal belief. But, you know, there's coaches doing microdosing coaching, or people who are, you know, guiding people with integration. Maybe they're not giving the psychedelics, but it's part of their work. And then there's the people that are like, well, I'm facilitating one-on-one because there's a high demand and accessibility is really low right now, or it's very hard for many people. So does your work bridge some of these people that are kind of, they're not certified, they're not doctors, but they're actually on the kind of the front lines giving psilocybin. Who knows? Like, I actually know somebody giving out ketamine. I don't actually know her training. There's people doing like kind of homemade MDMA sessions. Are you working with anybody in these realms? And if so, if not, like, tell us your thoughts on these realms.
Well, to be in the Psychedelic Medicine Association, there's two types of memberships. One is clinicians, and so we're like you have to be a clinician of some sort. You can be an acupuncturist, you could be a Reiki practitioner. Like, we're not picky. Like, it has to be a medical form of some type that because it's a curated information for those people, right? We have to keep our mission focused, and we also want to have the conversations focused in the forums. We have a clinicians only forum, so if you are a clinician, you can get into that forum, and then we're most comfortable speaking the language with our own, people who have our same training and our same experience, right? Because somebody might see the verbiage we're using from the outside and judge it in a certain way. Like, no, this is, the normal verbiage for this type of thing, right? So it's like a protected community that we have of clinicians. And then we have organizations that are non-clinicians, but, say, for example, like Therasil. People from Therasil can come in, or people from MAPS can come in that aren't necessarily clinicians, but they're in our milieu, and they can have discussions in the forum. But at this point, underground practitioners who are by themselves, I don't know that they are in the association. But what I do try to do, at least with the podcast, which again, the podcast and the association are completely different things. One is me as a person, and then one is me as, with my role in the Psychedelic Medicine Association. But on the podcast, we try to stress in many different ways. Like, the last episode we released, which was last week, was Dr. Julie Holland talking about establishing safeguards for psychedelic therapy. Because here's the thing. There are those two sides, right? Access is an issue. If you live nowhere near a treatment center and you can't get into a clinical trial, but you're struggling, who am I to say, don't do one of these underground things, right? This was built on underground therapists, and thank God for them. But also, like, what's their training? I have definitely myself had a run-in with somebody who referred to himself as a shaman. I'm fairly certain by the ceremony that he led that there had been no training whatsoever. There were so many things that could have been disasters that, like, luckily I'm versed enough with the medicine that it wasn't, but I was like, I would never send anybody to you. And so, like, this is the thing, is like, how do we establish safeguards in something that's still underground? The best we can do, and we put a podcast episode about this, is like, how do you choose a facilitator? And it's, again, a really hard thing, because they probably don't have a website that is something they could check out, and if you're living in Southern Illinois, how much word of mouth can you get from your friends? And so luckily there are things like Facebook groups that have popped up. There's like a psychedelic therapy Facebook group. There's Psychedelics Today has a Facebook group. Like, I think that's the best thing. If you're in a remote area and you don't have a circle that can help you with this, like, try to find a virtual circle. Go on Reddit, which is, I don't think I've ever said that in my life, but there is a big, especially there's a big microdosing community on Reddit that, James Fadman's always mentioning them, and try to get as much information as you can. And what we're trying to do is just educate potential patients on, please try to find the most trained person you can, or the most, even if they, like, say they have trained with CIIS or MAPS or one of the formal training, fantastic. But if not, maybe have they trained with a certain native or indigenous tradition? Great. Like, at least there's some training. And then ask, because there are people who've been trained who are still, abusing the patients, power struggles or sexual abuse. We know all the horror stories, right? So still, like, if you find somebody with good training, still do as best as you can to, like, ask around. And I have people all the time sending me, like, what do you think about this person? And I'll do, like, as best Google search, and I'll write to the two or three most educated people I know that may know them, and then I can report back. But, like, this is a real issue. I'm all for the people doing whatever they need to get access, and all for the underground therapists. But there's just a big need to educate people on what they should be looking for, even within the underground, while we're trying to get everything to be, more above ground.
Yeah, it's a really interesting world, because, we all want it to be accessible and available, but the reality is it's not. I mean, I've interviewed now enough people, someone in particular who said, he's a psychedelic assisted therapist, and he's like, I don't even answer my emails anymore. He just can't handle it. Like, even I get, and I'm sure you as well, I get inquiries like at least once every few weeks where someone's like, hey, I'm looking for this and that, and do you hold space? Do you know of anyone? Where can I go? And I'm like, oh my God, it's bad out there. And I know it's been discussed over and over, but I'm curious, like, what do you see? Because you're at the front line of, this world of the medical and therapists, but what do you see as the future with psychedelics, whether underground or above ground or accessibility? Like, do you notice this high demand and a low supply, or is this something I'm just seeing because I just hear it through the grapevine and then I have random people emailing me? What do you see as like the direction this is all going in the next couple of years?
Well, yeah, anything with illegality is going to be low supply, right? So like, and it's unfortunate because, say, let's use ayahuasca as an example. For you to go to one of the centers that's renowned or that's accessible, et cetera. Let's use Soltara as an example in Costa Rica, right? Like, is your average, 60 to 70-year-old person, is my mom going to go to, she's not, like, and so like, when will there be an ayahuasca center in Southern Illinois? That's going to be, that demand is going to be very long. Like the fact, when will there be a supply for that? Really hard to say. Thank goodness we have ketamine. There's at least something. It's not meant for every condition, nor is it meant for every person, but it does have a wide range of uses and it's very safe. You can use it with, like, I think most, if not all, antidepressants. So it's not like you have to taper off or anything. So great that we have that. Now there's also a lot of access to it because there's a lot of clinics. Now that question, so like it's two completely separate questions. For all the ones that are illegal, man, demand is really outweighing supply. Ketamine, it's a question of quality now. Like, do you want to just go in and have somebody put an IV in you and they're not talking to you and this and that? Like that is probably the most common type of therapy that's out there. And who's to say if that's the only thing you can get access to and that helps you because the glutamate effects and your NMDA receptors are happy, like great, do that better than nothing. But as things expand, it's like, I hope that with the conversation moves more toward things like ketamine-assisted therapies and ways that we can even get more out of the medicine, because then demand shouldn't be like, then we should have more supply because we'll only have, you don't have to keep going back and back and back if your therapy episodes, your journeys are more effective. So yeah, it's right. The way I see it going, like, thank goodness that there are people doing these trials, because then like Rick Doblin always says, the bottleneck is just going to be with trained therapists and cost. Those are the two things. Cost is you got to pay somebody to sit there for 8 hours, 2 people. Good Lord. That's, and so like, there's going to be a lot of discussions. It's going to be a fascinating decade of like, how do we get insurance to cover this? How do, so how do we get more therapists trained? And then that's just for MDMA and psilocybin. Somebody needs ayahuasca, then we've got, or a 5-MeO or something like that. Ibogaine, these other really major players that can be so effective. You're still having to go generally to Mexico or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's just depending on the medicine is what the future looks like. But my overall vision is hopefully that from a doctor's point of view, that we see this, your average primary care doctor sees this as another thing they can refer to. So if somebody comes into me and they've got an enlarged prostate, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to send them to a urologist. If they've got cancer, I'm not going to deal with it myself. Like, primary care doctors are trained to know when to refer. They're great at handling, diabetes, high blood pressure, and some basic things. But when it's past that level, we always refer. And same thing, I think, your average primary care doctor, that's the level of education I would like them to have, is to know when to refer out. And that my hope is that there are because right now, if you refer out, you're generally referring to a person who does one medicine, right? Like, oh, my friend is a ketamine practitioner. Oh, this person does ayahuasca facilitation. I am hoping someday that this realm of physicians or practitioners of some sort, they come out and you go to them, and heck, if it's psychiatrists, fantastic. But you go to them and you say, here's my pressing medical concern. Is it anxiety, or is it just I want to feel more energy in my day, whatever it is. And then they can go through your medical history with you and tell you which medicine they would refer you to.
Wow.
That's the ideal, right? Because at this point, like, your primary care doctor only has ketamine as something they can refer to legally. But even in the, coming up, I don't expect primary care doctors to know the psychedelics so intensely that they're going to know which one is best for any patient. I think that's a whole subspecialty that's going to have to develop. And so that's the future I see, is that, like, patients, when they've got an issue that the doctor said, look, you've got a mental health concern, you can try antidepressants, you can try therapy, and you can try psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Here are your 3 options. And because if they pick a therapy, well, the primary care doctor isn't doing that therapy anyway, so they're already referring out, right? Yes, they're probably writing the antidepressant prescription, but a whole lot of time they refer to psychiatry for that as well. So at this point, 2 out of the 3 options, they're going to refer out. So I'm hoping that a branch of psychiatry forms where it's just like, okay, if they've picked that branch, then you send them to the psychedelic psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist can decide, oh, either it's something I can do with you here in the office, maybe I do ketamine, oh, maybe I need to send you to the ayahuasca practitioner. Like that's my vision.
Wow. I'm like sitting here laughing, trying to imagine my primary care physician telling me to go drink ayahuasca.
Mine has. So
but I do remember the first time I drank it, I was seeing and she was an amazing therapist, but she had like never even heard of it. And I'm like, and she was like really deeply spiritual. I'm like, why? How have you never heard of this? And I mean, granted, it was a while ago, but it's so interesting. And I love.
I was just gonna say, like, every time we keep having this, like, why haven't you heard of this? Like, what? We have to, no shade on you, but like we have to keep giving some grace to these people because they're really busy. And at what point are they supposed to go Googling for a thing they don't know exists? Like if I didn't go to Burning Man in 2013, I hadn't had cannabis till I was 35.
Oh, wow.
Right? So like if you want the example of the last person on earth who should know about psychedelic therapies, it is me, raised in Southern Illinois to very Republican parents who did not drink till 26 and did not have cannabis till 35. I knew nothing, so I practiced medicine for a number of years thinking cannabis was evil. Like until you get the right community, until you get the right exposures, until I started training capoeira and some of my friends invited me to Burning Man, and like, that's how I got changed, right? I could still be that person that we're all looking down on who doesn't know. And it's just because I happen to make the right friends. And so like, look, if your therapist hasn't made certain friends, like we can't,
definitely no shame.
Yeah.
I was just surprised. I'm like, what? I thought everybody knew about this.
Yeah, it's just like we should realize that like most people listening to this podcast, we are very lucky to have been like I'm always so jealous about people who have like hippie parents and they're like, oh, like you said, I've been doing psychedelics for 10 years. I didn't do anything until 2013 because that's when the first time I had cannabis. Like I did nothing, right? So I have a lot of sympathy for what people don't know. And that's what really drives me. Like, as I said, I'm an expert in absolutely nothing in psychedelic medicine, aside from the fact that I am an expert in knowing what doctors do and do not know. And right now I know that they don't know about psychedelics. So
I love it. I blame growing up in Bay Area, California, where I took my first hit of acid at 14 when I barely even knew what it was, and I'm like, whoa. So no, I love it. And yeah, of course, no shame. And this is why you and me and all these other people are speaking about this. Your podcast alone is just such amazing information that a lot of people need to hear. I mean, even me, I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to know more of the science of psilocybin. I just know it works. I just know how it feels. But I'm curious, you said you have these forums. What is the talk? Like, I'm curious if there's a theme with a lot of these practitioners or doctors or anybody who's part of your association and getting information from you. Is there a concern or, are they like, where can I start giving this out? Like, are they excited about the future or, do they report like, God, I've had such an uptick in depression and anxiety since March of 2020. I'm curious, like, what is the trend going on with all that?
Well, I'd say so many of our members are students and in training. A lot of, first off, student memberships are free. So that explains that there's a ton of students. And so many of them. So I think there's like 2 main types of things I see in the forums. And one is like specific questions like what do I do if my patient's on this antidepressant and they want to go do ayahuasca, like that kind of thing, like down nitty gritty questions. But then the vast majority, like somebody came on yesterday and introduced himself and said he's a nurse and he was looking like so many people want to know how to get into this. That's like the main question. Like you just said with your people, like I'm currently this medical type of practitioner. I want to get into this, but this is where like, for example, I just did a podcast with Shannon Carlin from MAPS. She's the head of, MAPS MDMA assisted therapist training. And she was talking about like so many therapists find this so much more rewarding than the like 15-minute appointments, whatever. But I definitely remember I went to the MAPS donor dinner like in Austin in 2019, like the last thing we could do before COVID. And a friend of mine, well, I met him there and he was in real estate. And he's like, I'm thinking about being a psychedelic assisted therapist. And I remember telling him, like, so you sit there for 8 hours with a person, right? And like by the end of the MAPS conference, he's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That is definitely not my role in it. He's like, I want to know how to use like my real estate skills in it. I'm like, well, great. Like find a place that's looking to expand and work with them on the real estate side. Like there's so many aspects of this. Like I knew 1,000% I did not ever want to facilitate a ceremony once I left medicine. How can I use the skills that I have? And not only the skills that I have, but like I was talking about those two lists, the things I want that I give me energy and the things that drain my energy. How do I go to that things that give me energy list and use those in this field? Like you were saying, people, they go into these because they want to heal, and there's many different ways of healing, right? Like if they look at me and they say, you're quitting medicine, don't you want to like help people? I am 1,000% sure I have helped more people since quitting medicine. Through the podcast, let me tell you, nobody at the VA was writing me like, you saved my life. So many people in the podcast have written like, oh my gosh, this information really helped, So there's many different ways that you can participate in this new world. I mean, I see job openings with MAPS all the time. I see job openings with field trip or whatever. Like if you're following any of these things on Instagram, you're going to see like they need operations directors, they need medical monitors. Like you don't have to become a psychedelic assisted therapist if that's not necessarily your jam. Like that is one option, but I think there's going to be an entire area. Like I wish our forums had somebody that was like skilled in this, because there needs to be like a psychedelic career center, because how do we take the skills we have in maybe our corporate jobs or maybe our medical jobs, and take those skills and the things we want to do and then maximize our enjoyment and our fulfillment by using those in the psychedelic world.
Yes. And I love that you said this, because I talk about this a lot. Like, what are the future careers? Because it's interesting. I have a lot of clients who are interested in bridging little pieces of psychedelics into their work. So for example, I have a client who lost a lot of weight and got her health in order through a variety of, changing around her lifestyle and diet and intermittent fasting, but then also adding in microdosing, and it's like, well, where does that play a part? Or, someone who's doing sexual trauma healing, but then, add in some psychedelic, one-on-one facilitation or whatever it is. Someone else I work with has healed her eating disorder through psilocybin, so then they feel this call to like bring this into their work. And then of course, a lot of people I work with want to be integration coaches or, or doing some sort of coaching. Like I always just call it, it's life coaching, but with people who understand the psychedelic path. Because even that's something I went through working with therapists and coaches or whoever who didn't really understand how powerful some of these journeys could really be. And it's like to come back to your life, your career, your work, and not have anybody to talk to about it. That's a big piece too. And even I know I interviewed Rick Doblin. I've interviewed him twice, and he even mentioned all these additional needs we're going to have as psychedelic assisted therapy and the use of psychedelics and decriminalization and legalization, hopefully. As it expands, we're going to need more people doing other roles. What about musicians, or breath work facilitators? But I'm curious, where does integration play a part with these discussions you're having in your association? Like, does this come up? Does the integration come up at all, really, with these medical physicians and people, or is that kind of like a separate realm left to the integration coaches?
Oh no, it's definitely. So here's the thing about integration, and I love that you brought this up so that I can kind of discuss both things. So I don't know about you, but I have definitely gone to integration coaches I did not find that it was effective for me. And every integration coach is bringing in whatever their past is, right? So if they were, let's say, a CBT therapist for some reason, cognitive behavioral, then they'll like bring that into that's their style for integration, right? For me, it is, I think things that are important that people have as their training before going into integration, I think they should be trauma informed. And I'm really starting to think that there needs to be a somatic component. Right? Yeah, Beth is giving me a thumbs up.
I'm like
right?
cheering because and all my clients who are going into psychedelics also do have somatic experience. I think that's actually one of the number one most effective ways to integrate these medicines. But go on.
Yeah. I mean, I have yet to find
Huge.
a somatic therapist, and I've been on the search for ever, to find one who jives with me. And because, like I want to be seeing them in person, so like I move around a lot.
I was going to say, I can send you some.
Yes, please. Because here's the thing, like I'm a very cerebral person. All the lessons are up in my head. They have not made it to my nervous system. And here's the thing, like, so I know dear friends who really love their psychedelics and they want to become integration coaches. And I'm like, then you're essentially just like a life coach who hopefully can talk to you about your integration experiences. But that to me is not the most effective path. I really think you need to be a trained therapist on one of these other levels. I know I'm like, this is not the PMA speaking. This is just Lynn Marie as a patient. Like I want somebody who is not going to re-traumatize me or another patient, and that's going to actually know effective ways, because I think that's what's the issue with so many of us is like, we might have learned the lessons in psychedelics cerebrally, but if they're not getting to our body, I mean, I keep learning the same lessons, and like, I'm sure Mama Ayahuasca is like, home slice, we just told you this, but like get it into, and she even said the last time, like, call this integration guy, but like his methods were not somatic. And so like they weren't getting in. And so, if you're thinking about becoming an integration coach, like I beg you, like get training in somatics, get training in trauma-informed therapies, because you want to be more than a life coach. You do. You want to have some experience in like transpersonal stuff or psychedelic emergence and versus emergency. Like, look at the stuff that Psychedelics Today is putting out as courses. Like Kyle, man, he's gone through some crazy training. Like I've sat in on some of their sessions. It's like, that's some next level stuff that really, if somebody comes to you after 5-MeO and their mind has been blasted away and you don't have the specific training to know, like, gosh, are they in a psychotic episode? Like, do I need to maybe send them to a psychiatrist at this point to medically kind of reverse and get them back to where they can be grounded? Like these are real, and like psychedelic integration therapy is not to be taken lightly. And so I know I'm kind of like this like Debbie Downer psychedelic grandma who's like, do it right. But these are people's psyches. I'm one of them, and so like I just want people to have as much training as they possibly can, and I'm not saying you have to have all the trainings before you start, but like be on that path, because you want to do what's best for your patients, not just what's best for you, like getting out of your job and now psychedelics is a thing I can charge for this integration. Like there's going to be a lot of those people. You want to rise to the top as the one that's really getting effective results for your clients.
I agree so much. And I'm sitting here going like, yes, yes, yes. Because I'm exactly like you. I was like one of those people where it was just the head, and I started to see like, wow, I need help. It's like going to Peru every year, the shit hits the fan eventually if you don't integrate it properly. And so thankfully, I have been very blessed with some somatic therapists. I've worked with multiple who also are on the medicine path themselves. And, one of them, actually two of them in particular, like also facilitate. So that helped me more than anything. So yes, I agree that it's so much more than just becoming a coach and that's it. And it's a constant journey of learning more and more, especially as we all learn more, we all heal more, we keep growing. So thank you for saying that. This is really good. So tell people a little bit about what you have upcoming, soon, or what your plans are for the future. I'm sitting here. This is like my biggest problem. I'm such a visionary. I'm like, wow, I could see her doing this and this and this and this and adding this and. I see like 20 different businesses that could stem out of this.
Tell me that afterward.
Because it's so important. This work is like, oh my God, this is the kind of work that we need. It's the education, the knowledge, and getting the word out there to so many people. But yeah, what's in the pipeline for you?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Well, here's a little thing for your guests. Our only cash inflow is memberships, right? And like I said, we give away so many free memberships, and anybody who can afford one, you still get a free membership. Like nobody is kept out because of cost. We will never keep somebody out, but we've probably given away, $30,000-$40,000 worth of free memberships. So we don't have a ton of like, let's say, advertising budget. And so if you can go to your primary care doctor the next time you go and just mention psychedelics, you're helping us spread the word. You don't even have to talk about the Psychedelic Medicine Association. If they want to know more, great, psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. But like just telling them about that is probably going to lead them to go home and Google. right? Maybe even after your appointment, they're right there at their computer. They're going to start Googling. Like, help us spread the word. That would be so helpful. Because then, yeah, maybe they'll find us when they search. But as long as they're finding information somewhere, then we're having the effect, right? But the Psychedelic Medicine Association has been so lucky that Psych Congress, who you might have heard of, they had a psychedelics. It's a conference for psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health therapists. They had a psychedelics day last year with Rick and Robin Carhart Harris and Roz Watts. They have decided to do an entire separate conference on psychedelics, and they have partnered with us. And so, cool. Yeah, we're very grateful. So it's the first ever Sana Symposium. Sana means health in Sanskrit or Latin or something. I should figure out which language it is. But Sana Symposium, it's a 3-day, unfortunately still virtual, but hopefully the last time it'll have to be virtual. It's in September. And we have Robin Carhart Harris. We have Rick Doblin. Like, the steering committee is Rosalind Watts. We have all those people are on the steering committee. They're all going to speak. It comes with continuing medical education, and that's our official Psychedelic Medicine Association event for the year. And so if you go to sanasymposium.com, you can sign up for that. We would love to see you there. Like, we're going to be talking about these things, especially if you're a therapist. Like, we're going to be talking about the specifics of the medicine and how to work them into the current medical model. We'll discuss the legalities of discussing psychedelics with your patients and all those kinds of things. So, like, this should be, and also, again, CME comes with it. So, yeah. So that's our biggest thing on the horizon. But like, if you are out there and you are a student or you're in training or you're a clinician or you have an organization, like, do you have an end of life organization that's looking at using psilocybin or, in that way, like Therasil is, because we're global. The Psychedelic Medicine Association, let me butcher that. Psychedelic Medicine Association. We can call it the PMA, but it is global. And so, we have got people from Australia, we've got people from Canada, we've got people from England and South America. Like, if you have an organization and you would like to be part of us, first off, nonprofits are completely free. Secondly, if you're not a nonprofit and you still can't afford, we will give you a membership. We just want everybody in there to be having this conversation, because what we're doing, our mission is to educate clinicians. But there are so many other steps to getting access, which is like we said, training more therapists, getting it covered by insurance, getting it legal. And so we want to bring together all the people who are working on those angles so that everybody can be kind of in the same sandbox and share resources so that we can all move this forward together.
So good. So good. And tell people, where can they find you and follow you and check out your work?
Okay. You can find us at, as I'm like legit looking up our Twitter handle, you can find us. So basically, psychedelicmedicineassociation.org is going to have links to everything. If you want to listen, we're Psychedelic Medicine Association on Instagram, but that's not by any means where we do most of our thing. Really, we're on LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn is where a whole lot of, by the way, if you're a psychedelic entrepreneur person, you got to get on LinkedIn. It's somehow like the number one place that people seem to be going for this. I don't know if you found that, Beth, but like, it is a massive psychedelic party on LinkedIn that I did not expect.
I know. I'm on there once in a while.
It's just actually like the most community I felt in a social media platform of people in like the psychedelic science world, because if you want to be talking about your trips and stuff, go to Facebook and stuff. But like, what's really going on, like kind of behind the scenes in science, go to LinkedIn. So Psychedelic Medicine Association there. You can also follow the Plant Medicine Podcast. So we are on Instagram at Plant Medicine DOTORG, which is plantmedicine.org spelled out. And I do have a website, which is plantmedicine.org. I will be very honest, I don't spend a lot of time working on it because once the association came up, it's just kind of there. But there are resources there. There are integration therapists there. There are psilocybin and ayahuasca retreats listed there, and there's some blog posts, but that's where the podcast can be found in all of the show notes. So that's plantmedicine.org. And like I said, psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. If you go there, there's links to all of our social media. We would love to have you. You can even just put your name in there to get our newsletter, and our newsletter just gives you a little background on psychedelic medicines. And then, anytime we have any events for the public, you can be notified about those as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lynn Marie. It was such an honor to have you here. And I must bring you back because there's so much more I want to ask and talk about. But until then, thank you very much. And join us next week for more on the psychedelic entrepreneur, medicine for these times. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.